Van Johnson lists the gay stars from the old days of Hollywood. His dates were secret. John Van Johnson was born in Newport, Rhode Island, on August 25, 1916. His full name is Charles Vannell Johnson. He went from having little to becoming a big star at the box office at Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. He was a symbol of youthful hope at a time when America really needed it. His life and work show both the glitz and glamour of old Hollywood, as well as the weakness, strength, and quiet courage of a man who went through personal problems behind the scenes while still giving people hope and love. Early in life, Van Johnson had to deal with difficulties and stick with things. After his father died, he was mostly raised by his mother, Loretta Sundur, who pushed him to be interested in performing. Johnson liked theater and music a lot as a teenager, and developed a love for playing that would shape his future. He moved to New York City to try to make it as an actor on Broadway. He worked hard in chorus roles and small roles, which gave him important stage experience. The early years were not exciting. They had long hours, uncertainty, and a lot of cash stress. But Johnson's hard work paid off when Hollywood talent agents saw how good-looking he was and how natural he was on stage. Johnson became a movie star after signing with MGM, which would be the most important company in his career. At first, he was only cast in small parts. His big break came during World War II, when his clean-cut look and friendly personality really hit home with American viewers. Van Johnson wasn't like the rough or cynical heroes of other times. He was kind, friendly, and honest about his feelings. Because of this, he was great in war movies where he showed soldiers not as unbeatable fighters, but as people whose lives were shaped by fear, friendship, sacrifice, and love. One of the most important events in Johnson's life happened in 1943, when he was shooting a movie called Joe, and had a terrible accident. He was hit in the head by a falling camera crane, which hurt him badly and almost ended his career and life. The doctors were afraid he might not make it, and his healing took a long time and was very painful. He had to have metal plates put in his head and will always have scars from the accident. Surprisingly, the public's knowledge of his experience made them love him more, not less. Johnson came back to the screen changed, both physically and mentally. This gave his roles more depth and sensitivity. In the middle to late 1940s, Van Johnson was at the top of his fame. He was able to easily switch between war stories, romantic comedies, and musicals, as shown in movies like 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, Battleground, The Caine Mutiny, and In the Good Old Summertime. He often played parts that stressed loyalty, moral honesty, and emotional openness, which were all qualities that matched his public image. People believed Van Johnson. He felt like a friend or brother, and that trust made him very famous for a long time. Johnson's personal life was much more complicated than his wholesome screen image made it seem. He was very private, and the stresses of fame, studio standards, and the limits on personal expression in Hollywood in the 1960s and 1970s often got to him. The strict studio system forced everyone to fit in, leaving little room for individuality or weakness. Johnson dealt with these problems in a quiet way, staying professional even though he was emotionally alone and having health problems related to his earlier accident. In the 1950s and 1960s, as Hollywood changed, Johnson's star power slowly faded, but he never stopped wanting to be an actor. He kept working steadily in theater, movies, TV, and shows on Broadway and across the country. In his later years, he found new fans who praised his legacy and the way he aged so gracefully in the business. His later acts had a reflective quality that came from having lived a long time and observing many things. Van Johnson married Eve Abbott, a former stage actor, on January 25, 1947. It happened during Hollywood's golden age, which was both glamorous and strict, a time when an actor's company contract often controlled both his work life and how he looked in public. Johnson was a very bankable star for Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer at the time. People loved him for his good-natured, all-American charm, his easy smile, and his boy-next-door appeal. MGM worked hard to promote this image, and his wedding to Eve Abbott was widely reported as a fairy tale union that seemed to confirm everything fans thought about him, that he was the perfect romantic leading man, settling down in happiness at the height of his fame. Eve Abbott was no stranger to the world of show business. She had poise, knowledge, and knew how to deal with the attention of the public that came with being in show business. Their marriage gave them a girl named Skylar, who became the most important person in Johnson's family life. According to many, Van was a loving and watchful father who cared deeply about his daughter. Later, his friends and co-workers remembered that even though his marriage was complicated, his love for Skylar was real and lasting, and he was proud to be there for her, which was different from the typical Hollywood dads at the time. When Johnson married Eve, she gave him her 2 kids from a previous relationship. Their names are Edmund Keenan and Tracy Keenan Wynn. Some of them, like Tracy, went on to have great careers as screenwriters, working on movies like The Longest Yard. As Van's stepfather, he added another layer to his family life and helped build his public image as a family man. Even though things didn't always go smoothly in the household, Johnson is said to have tried hard to be supportive and active, dealing with the difficulties of combining families while being watched all the time. Even though they put on a good show for the world, the marriage started to crack under the weight of emotional and professional stresses. Van Johnson and Eve Abbott broke up in 1961, ending a relationship that had been going strong for more than 10 years. The fact that they didn't get divorced right away shows both the social norms of the time and how complicated their situation was. The marriage wasn't officially over until 1968, which was 7 years after they got married. By that time, Johnson's fame had faded from its height, and the strict studio system that used to control every part of his life had mostly fallen apart. This made it easier for him to be more open about his personal truths, though it was still not completely free. In the years after they split up and got divorced, Eve Abbott said things that made their marriage look a lot more confusing. Eve said that Van Johnson was gay, and that their marriage was structured by MGM as a lavender marriage, a union meant to hide Johnson's sexuality and give the impression that the couple was straight. In Hollywood in the middle of the 20th century, where even a hint of homosexuality could ruin a career, these kinds of deals were routine. Studios did a lot to keep their stars out of trouble, and they often pushed or set up weddings for their stars that would please the public and keep the movies coming in. For many years, Van Johnson was portrayed as the perfect example of a good American man. MGM worked hard to make him look like the perfect love-leading man, with his boyish smile, red hair, and easygoing way with people. But Johnson later hinted at a much more complicated personal life, one that was marked by secret, coded relationships, and a quiet rejection of Hollywood's strict moral standards. Johnson apparently admitted to having relationships with other men during the golden age of Hollywood, in rare private conversations late in life. He named specific actors he dated while living under constant studio surveillance. Johnson once said, "I didn't have the luxury of being honest. Back then, being honest could cost you everything you worked for." In the 1940s and 1950s, Hollywood had strict morals. Being gay was seen as scandalous, dangerous, and the end of a career. Being openly gay was not a choice for stars who were under contract. Johnson had a better grasp on this truth than most. He was one of MGM's most valuable assets at the height of his fame, and the company kept a close eye on his friendships, romantic dates, and social life. One of the guys Johnson is said to have talked about was actor Montgomery Clift, who was also an MGM star but had a sensitive screen persona that hid deep personal problems. Accounts attributed to Johnson say that the two men had a private, intense, and quiet friendship that no one else knew about. Monty was not the same. Johnson is said to have said that he truly felt everything, which made him dangerous to himself and appealing to others. Later biographers said that their bond was based on knowing each other. Both men were stuck because of standards they could never fully meet. He is also said to have talked about Tab Hunter, a younger actor who became famous in the 1950s and later admitted that he was gay. Hunter would later live openly, but in the beginning of his work he had to be in relationships set up by the studio to keep up a straight image. Johnson is said to have said, "Tab was cute, scared, and very young. There was a lie going on, but he hated it the most. If they did date, it would have been short and well-kept secret, based more on fear than freedom." Rock Hudson is another name that comes up a lot when people try to figure out Johnson's past. He is probably the most famous example of how Hollywood kept secrets. No solid proof of a connection exists between the two, but Johnson is said to have admitted that many actors in his circle had similar secret lives. Rock knew all the rules better than anyone else. It is said that Johnson said, "You smiled. You always stuck to the people they told you to date. Whether they were friends, confidants, or something more, Johnson and Hudson were part of an unspoken group that had to keep quiet." Johnson made it clear that these relationships were not casual ones, but emotional lifelines in a field that expected people to lie. He told us that we weren't sneaking around for fun. We were trying to stay alive without losing who we were. It became normal to keep things secret. There are meetings set up through trusted middlemen, talks held in private homes, and a constant fear of being found out. Many people say that his marriage to Eve Abbott in 1947 was part of MGM's plan to control his image, and Johnson later admitted that many Hollywood weddings are fake. He said, "Some people get married because they love each other. Some people got married to feel safe. It was neither all the time, but sometimes it was both." In his later years, Johnson seemed less interested in gossip and more interested in telling the truth about the past. He thought, "I don't regret the love. I'm sorry I was afraid." It was his belief that the public should know how many lives were affected and limited by Hollywood's strict rules. Folks today tend to look at Van Johnson's legacy with a wider, more helpful eye. His story is a reminder that behind the glitz and glamour of old Hollywood, there were real people who had to break up their identities in order to achieve. It took Johnson a long time to get back in touch with a part of himself that the time that made him famous had denied him. He just said, "We were there. We just weren't allowed to be seen." Soon after, in the early 1990s, Johnson quietly left the public eye for good, ending a long and important career that had shaped Hollywood's golden age. After spending so much of his life in movies, he decided to spend his later years in peace, away from the cameras and studio publicity machines that used to be his daily life. He moved into an apartment on the east side of Manhattan at 405 East 54th Street, a home that showed both the sophistication and privacy of a man who had a very public life and now liked being in a calm, familiar place. There, Johnson lived quietly and mostly out of sight, surrounded by the sounds of New York City instead of the fake lights of Hollywood sets. He was happy with his memories of an amazing past. Johnson had to move to Tappan's Inn Manor, an assisted living facility in Nyack, New York, because his health was getting worse over time. There he could get the care and help he needed. Even in this last chapter, he remained a figure of quiet respect. Those who knew him described him as a gracious presence whose legendary status stood in gentle contrast to his simple, unassuming daily life. Johnson died on December 12, 2008, at the age of 92. He had lived through and helped shape approximately 100 years of showbiz history. His body was cremated as a simple and understated way to say goodbye to a man who was once one of the biggest stars in classic Hollywood. He is remembered not only for his fame, but also for how well he captured the spirit of a bygone age.